did it come to this?
How did it come to this, and where does it go from here? I think if the Murdaugh saga tells us one thing, it is that monsters are real. And they are fathers, they are sons, they are brothers, they are colleagues. They're right beside us, they're in the world with us. Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I can't help looking at Alec Murdaugh, and because of his extra pale skin, his pink complexion, and also his at times squeaky voice during the 911 call, I can't help thinking of Porky Pig, and I don't mean that just to be disparaging. There's been something cartoonishly absurd, Looney Tunes, about the Murdaugh trial. There's also something piggish about the amount of money that Murdaugh was making and then also stealing. You have a rich person, prominent, privileged, spoiled, and then to top it all, he's also stealing from poor and vulnerable people like a housekeeper and a car accident victim. How much is enough? When is it ever enough? And you might say that question in terms of Alec Murdaugh, but what about us? What about you? What about me? How much is enough? You see photos like this of Paul shooting ducks for entertainment. That's how the rich, or at least these rich folks, seem to feel better about the world, by shooting and killing animals and stealing from the poor. I've touched on this before, but it's this idea of preying on the weak, and then eventually one kills one's own family. And why does he do that? Because he's worried about something he's done, or something his son's done, and he tries to shift blame to someone else. But essentially the murders were committed to feel better about an already bad situation. If Murdaugh no longer loved Maggie, or even at least one of his own children, who did he love, or who did he love more? I've been saying for some time that he loved himself more than anyone else. And drugs, I believe, widened that little pathway into a major highway. You may remember the prosecutor during the trial saying, yeah, Alec may have loved Maggie, Alec may have loved Paul, but nobody cared about anything more. Alec cared about himself more than anything or anyone else. Alec cared about Alec. He said that quite a few times to very effectively. And so what drugs do in a situation like that, where you already love yourself, you're already indulging, you're already self-indulgent, drugs basically create a pathway of gratification, where you almost create a default setting to feed a feeling. If you feel a certain way and you do something, you shoot something, I'm talking about hunting or whatever, take a drug or whatever, you feed that feeling simply because it's there. And the wealth and resources allow that. There's nothing that stands in the way. There's no interrogation of that process. And then soon that psychology takes over everything else. Do you want something? Do you want someone else's money? Well, because you can take it, why don't you? Because you can have it, why don't you have it? And of course, the thing that paved the way for that level of self-indulgence wasn't just addiction, but the high-octane, unfettered self-indulgence that the super wealthy enjoy when they become addicts. It's that in itself. And what that does is pave the way to being allowed to be greedy. You see that? It paves the way to being allowed to be greedy. Should you be allowed to be that greedy? Should you be allowed to be spoiled and selfish and beyond accountability? Is there anyone that says, well, maybe there should be consequences for this, but then there just never is?
My mommy always said there were no monsters, no real ones, but there are. We better get back, Because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
The monsters mostly come at night, and they certainly did in this case. And so why should any of that psychology change when he's on the stand? If I say stuff, I get what I want. If I say something, people believe me and I get what I want. And so what does he do? I'm quoting from WJCL, quote, over the course of 2 days, Murdaugh testified for a total of about 10 hours. He abruptly changed his alibi regarding the night of the murders and confessed to a wide range of financial crimes against his former law firm and clients, end quote. But I also think it's fair to say I found him a terrible and unconvincing liar, I don't know about you, as well as a terrible and unconvincing kind of oink oink crybaby. And the jury obviously didn't feel any sympathy for him or believe him either. Through the course of this case, we've gotten to know the South and Southerners. We've dealt with the landscape and the memories that it sort of infused with in the previous video. We've dealt not only with the disgraceful rich, but also the downtrodden poor. We've dealt with Stephen Smith and his family who are still seeking justice. But above all, I think the Murdaugh case is one about revenge from the lower classes for years of predation and deprivations at the hands of one upper class piggy in particular. According to The Guardian, quote, so great and far-reaching was the power of the Murdaugh name that locals in that part of South Carolina referred to it as Murdaugh Country. Alex Murdaugh, a lawyer at the family firm he's charged with defrauding, stands accused of being the embodiment of what happens when people are cushioned over generations from the consequences of their actions. So can you see how that is one way to become a monster, to be cushioned from the consequences of your actions and to become a incredible monster, a huge monster, well, when that is intergenerational. The article goes on to note that this story unfolds in the South, cradle of the good old boy network of near oligarchical governance. That's no coincidence. The article in The Guardian goes on to note from the writer who writes, quote, I happened to be in South Carolina last week, and it's very beautiful, but woo, to an outsider, it's intensely weird. White tour guides lead white tour groups around downtown Charleston, cheerfully pointing out where enslaved people were sold before pulling up at the gift shop, end quote. And that gives you a totally different level of this idea of entitlement. So what the Murdaugh case also reveals is the cold light of day, that moment when the party is over and reality sets in, and that the people are, after all, not above the law. And it's like the world's worst hangover, where 5 generations of easy living evaporates at the sound of a gavel, and suddenly the world you faced with, you have to face as a regular person. As a convicted double murderer and fraudster, Murdaugh is even lower than that. The change in fortunes in this case have been spectacular, from a respected Southern dynasty to a disgrace, from the dizzy heights of prestige and privilege to spending one's final decades among the dregs of humanity. It's true, isn't it? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. But you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be physically big, you can simply be big-headed. And the bigger-headed you are as well, the harder you fall. And that is why we want to be grounded in reality. Does that make sense? I hope you've enjoyed the coverage on this channel on the Murdaugh case. If you have, you might want to join the Patreon channel for further discussions. There's also additional behind-the-scenes coverage of me and what I'm up to on the Team Peachtree channel, so head over there as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.